Skip Rizzo, who's going to talk about virtual humans, another probably key to the future of going beyond the couch. Skip Rizzo, I like to think of you as kind of one of the OGs of VR. If you look back to papers back in the early '90s, it's pretty much he's been there since they started with medical VR. He runs the medical VR at the Institute for Creative Technology, which is another place that's done kind of everything in VR. So, yeah. Oh, do you need this or do you have yours? Got it.
I promised Brennan that I was going to keep this to under 25 minutes, so here goes. Virtual reality and virtual humans are cool. It's going to change the face of psychology. Any questions? Actually, yeah. But I'm going to try to get through this in 25 minutes. I do have a lot of stuff. After seeing the earlier presentations, I said I got to beef my stuff up a little bit. So, oh boy. Maybe I got to get closer to, let's see, there we go. I don't want to stand behind here, but I may have to. Let's see. All right, I get an extra minute for that. Okay, so expanding the reach of psychology through virtual humans. Let's start off, very basic definition. I'm not going to repeat the past, but just so we're all on the same page. VR, if you look at it, a collection of technologies, enabling technologies, computing, graphics, interface technologies, a whole range of things, ways to track the user and promote engagement within a simulation. I like the more human-centric definition, which just brings it down to basic human-computer interaction, ways we can make interacting with computational devices more natural, more like the real world, something that's a little bit different from hunting and pecking on a keyboard, and that's what VR does, and virtual humans as well. Now, when we think about VR, I'd like to start off by thinking about a classic conceptualization that came out in the 90s, the 3 I's: immersion, interactivities, and imagination. And when we think about immersion in VR, of course, wearing a head-mounted display, being in an environment, looking around, being in simulations, being removed from the outside world. A very important area of VR, an area that we've done a ton of work in. We've also, done some other work with upper extremity rehabilitation. So the idea of wearing a sensor on a headset and it tracks your hands in a first-person format, embed that within a game-like context. This is work that we're doing in an immersive environment and a series of games that are being tested in rehabilitation. No virtual humans in the loop here, just the user hand represented in real time as they interact with content in a variety of ways to facilitate upper extremity rehab. Now, the other I, interactivity, this is back from one of our first projects in 1996, a mental rotation training system. No virtual humans yet, just interacting with blocks. Because back then, the Stone Age of VR, we could do blocks really well. So, we projected them up in a holographic projection, an old thing called an immersive desk. $200,000 silicon graphics reality engine needed to drive it. Way back before the nuclear winter, still in the Stone Age of VR. Well, anyway, moving forward, started tracking the user's body in a balance training exercise. So an elderly person wearing a harness could drive this open source game, Penguin, down a ski slope, lean forward to go fast, lean back to slow down. Interactivity. But as well, forgot I had this in here, it doesn't have to always be on a big screen. If you make interesting, engaging activities, people will interact with it. And so on a simple laptop, a range of motion activity. Now, where the interactivity becomes really cool is when we bring virtual humans into the mix. Now, virtual humans can be delivered in immersive environments, certainly, and some of the stuff that Mel showed, of course, wearing a headset, a lot of value there. But also, if you want to get things out to the masses, virtual humans can be usefully applied in a non-immersive environment. So this is one we did 10 years ago almost, SimCoach for the military, it was a online intelligent agent that you could ask questions about PTSD. He would ask questions back and give you a score, or come back after you've answered some of these questions and say, looks like you're going through some troubles here. If you want, you can punch in your zip code on in this little box, and a list of providers will pop up in your area. And I can talk to you about what kinds of therapies are available. So it was a toe in the water, a breaking down of barriers to care, getting people to interact in a private way, talk about things they wouldn't talk about with their friends, family, or let alone they don't want to go to a shrink. So this was early work, and I'll just let him introduce himself in case we don't meet him later. Oh, come on. Come on, Bill. I don't know what the problem is here, but let's see if this will work again.
Well, I'm not a real person, if that's what you're asking. But I'm based on the personality and experiences of real soldiers and Marines. I'm still just a piece of software, but I'm getting better all the time. So hopefully I can be a helpful piece of software to talk to.
So a way for people to interact in a safe place, get information, get some self-assessment, and maybe seek help that they could benefit from. Some of the other work that we did, flat screen monitor, is job interview training for high-functioning autism. So we could set up a wide range of characters, 6 characters, 6 different backdrops. We can make each character nice, neutral, or cranky. And so, for example, this character right here.
I'm glad you're here. In a minute, we'll get into some questions about the job. But before we do, why don't you just tell me about yourself?
Now, we could make her cranky. We could change up the setting, warehouse, a restaurant, whatever. Or we could pick a different character.
This is an entry-level position. I guarantee there will be things you won't like about this job. That said, what's the most important thing you think you're looking for in a job?
So at the end, I'll show a little bit of data and user experience of this, because it's, it's not a real person, but people suspend disbelief and interact with virtual humans in a way that oftentimes not only mimics what they do in the real world, but can sometimes, as Mel showed a couple of times, can amplify the interaction. And these are some virtual humans that I work with Arno Hartholt at our lab, that he's responsible for creating some of this great work. Now, the research in this area has just grown. I mean, I just didn't have the time to do all the stuff between 2008 and 2018. But 2018, it's off the chart. A lot of people are interested in this. But if you go back in history, back in 1999, people were applying virtual humans in VR, clinical VR applications, but they're very primitive. In this case, Christine Batella's lab looked at panic disorders and agoraphobia, exposure therapy. And the interesting thing was, in spite of the impoverished nature of those characters, you couldn't talk to them, couldn't interact with them really. They were just props, basically. You saw it was as good as the real thing, as good as in vivo, like the last speaker talked about the in vivo studies. More recently, Stefan Bouchard has done this work showing that actually addressing social phobia in a more controlled and systematic environment in VR with virtual humans that, again, aren't exact replicas of the real thing, show better outcomes on some measures for relieving social phobia. Fear of public speaking, actually, the upper right quadrant, that's some of Mel Slater's early work. He's really evolved virtual humans since then. But this is where you could practice your speech under a range of conditions. The characters would be falling asleep, yawning, or very attentive, and so on. But this is what it looked like back in the 90s. Now you have standalone $200 headsets that can deliver things like this.
These results are promising. What impact do you think it may have in the future?
Nice question. Let's see what else do we have here.
Don't you think that your point of view has certain limitations? How did you choose your presentation's approach?
Anyway, you get the idea. So you can have a range of provocative things, and of course, the applause at the end, the reinforcement. But now these are freebies, pretty much. You can get these on a Gear, a Samsung Gear, an Oculus Go, a standalone headset. And now it's kind of opening the door towards self-help a little bit in this area. We give it a pass in psychology because, you know, everybody's got a little fear of public speaking. It just takes a little bit of practice. It's a skill. But really, it is a clinical condition when it's in the extreme. But we've kind of let the horse out of the barn and say, okay, self-help, fair enough, do it. Now, even more interesting is the Sphere of Heights application that has a virtual human, not a therapist. A lot of people say it's a virtual therapist. It's a guide, and it's a self-help fear of heights scenario. So, you know, they sent people home for 2 weeks with a headset. This character, you know, guided you through the height scenarios, you know, gave you a pep talk, did some cognitive behavioral stuff with you, and it was as good, and in some cases better than actual in-person therapy. But these folks were properly diagnosed by a clinician. So I'm speaking sort of on both sides of the fence here. I think there's a value in promoting access to care. 60% of people with mental health conditions, according to the World Health Organization, never seek treatment for them. So we want to make treatment more available. But are we on a slippery slope here by promoting this, and will people self-diagnose and self-treat? Really big issue that we're going to be facing in the future. In some of our combat-related PTSD exposure therapy, again, sort of like props, they move around, you don't get to talk to them, but we can add crowds or numbers of people into an experience as part of the provocative stimuli we deliver to help people confront and process difficult emotional memories. And more close to home, really in a personal way, we expanded the work to military sexual trauma and did a safety and feasibility trial first to make sure we weren't causing more problems than helping. But basically, clinicians said we want a perpetrator in these scenes. We're not creating virtual sexual assaults, we're creating context where these things happen so the patient can confront and process, talk about their experience. So we built this, this perpetrator, and he can pop up anywhere, or he can follow you around like the Terminator. And it was really creepy, and the clinicians, when they saw it, they said, I don't know if we're going to use that now. It's a little too much. They wanted it at first, but it was really provocative. So in the trial, they ended up using it in very sparingly in certain cases, but it just goes to show, you know, in some cases, this might be almost too much, even though you know, your frontal lobes are saying this is not real. Meanwhile, your limbic system, reptile brain, is reacting to the perceptual stimuli and activating the emotion, which is at the core of what we want to do clinically. We want to activate emotions and work with people on how they deal with those emotions. And by the way, we got good clinical outcomes. We didn't hurt anybody, no critical incidents, and statistical and clinically meaningful reductions in PTSD in this small study. We've got a lot more work to do there. Now, the idea is translation in the trauma area to civilian populations. A ton of trauma in the world, a lot of people in need. We're currently working with a group in New York City to use virtual humans in settings for police officers to teach de-escalation training. And I think it's very important because when you look at the challenges that police officers and first responders, firefighters, all these folks face, they're confronted with trauma all day, and it just builds up. And maybe you've got maybe a sub-threshold PTSD thing going on where you don't have all the symptoms and all the stuff that would give you that diagnosis, but maybe you got a little emotional numbing, and maybe you got a little startle response or hypervigilance. Maybe that's a toxic combination for pulling a trigger under certain circumstances. So if we can begin to teach police officers in these contexts ways to use their best weapon, communication, that we might be able to de-escalate some of these situations and have a positive impact. Autism, early stuff, very primitive, but it worked. And some of the folks on the spectrum, particularly children, the more impoverished characters were good. It wasn't overly complex. It wasn't overwhelming. The Sue Cobb's work back in 2002 built a variety of these things and delivered positive results. Another group in Texas, University of Texas, Center for Brain Health, great place. They've built basically a giant virtual world for social skills training. This is their early work using Second Life. There's a human in the loop driving an interactive character and actually showing changes in brain activation in social skill believed areas of the brain. So that's what that study was all about. Now, with our work with the Dan Marino Foundation, and there's Dan right there, who supported this work, as I said, multiple characters, different backdrops. We can change the personality. I'm going to skip through this part because you already saw it.
It's a good program, and it teaches you how to do an interview, and it teaches you how to be in an interview situation with another person.
And did you see your performance improve? Did you get better?
I get better every single time I do it. I get better.
So that's data from the first study we published with the system. Oh, there's some old people out here that get that joke. I love it. I always wait to hear. I've actually done talks that is just like dead silence, you know? It's like, that's Hendrix, come on. Well, anyway, you know, these folks at Dan Marino Center, now this is out 170 sites, but they really engaged with it. And you can see in the data, you know, vocational counselors rating face-to-face interviews, then practice trials, 4 practice trials with the system, and then a face-to-face interview rating. And certainly more research has to be done on this, but you know, you find that there's an empowering effect that goes on when people who've had a challenge, and people who can do a job, but choke during these kinds of social interactions. So that's work I really like, and now we're expanding it with the help of Magic Leap to do this in augmented reality. And basically, you know, you're sitting talking to an empty chair, but what you see in the chair across from the table is a virtual human that does the interview. Now, I wouldn't say it's ready for prime time. We're getting there, but in the future, augmented reality could be used to build a social skills obstacle course in a social setting where you walk around and characters pop up and engage you in social conversation. And maybe a virtual human is a coach that's sitting on your shoulder that's giving you a pep talk for how to interact. So, you know, wide open area. The thing I love about VR, there's no wall. You know, no matter how far you get along in an area, there's still a ton more you can do. So here's a little bit more on that with a person that's been through it.
Instead of using a TV screen to deliver a job interview character, with the Magic Leap system, we can actually have a person sit in a real room, in a real job interviewing context.
A lot of us, we were isolated, or at least we didn't have many friends. At least I didn't have many friends. So we're always around the technology. That's how we connect with people. Definitely think with a DMF with Magic Leap will add a lot. It's really going to help us expand our reach.
Okay, so now moving up to the next level, you know, these are all pretty well scripted or on rails or Wizard of Oz driven characters a lot of times. Now the next level is using natural language processing, voice recognition, interaction with characters that have a little something in you know, AI delivered software that allows for more credible interactions. And this is a giant field that people have been studying for a long time on ways to do it. At our center, the Institute for Creative Technologies here at USC, this has been one of the primary research areas that we've explored, doing a lot of stuff for the military, but also leveraging some of the military funding. And by the way, the military is great because they're like venture capitalists that you don't have to pay back. You know, so they fund this work, they build the technology, and then, you know, psychologists can swoop in and try to build things, you know, off of that development. And one of our early projects was the Virtual Patient Project. And down below is one of our early primitive characters. This was actually a sexual assault survivor that med students had to practice doing a sensitive clinical interview. And where we found, even as impoverished as that character was, that they related to it and asked questions lockstep similar to what they did with standardized actor patients. And so, you know, standardized actor patients, there's limitations. You can't have kids, you know, elderly people sometimes, actors, you know, if they're doing a job at a med school, they're usually not getting jobs in big movies, so they're not maybe the best actors. And it's no consistency. So here's one that we did in 2012 for the School of Social Work.
Sergeant Castilla, what brings you in today?
Well, my wife told me she thought I should talk to someone. She's been pretty concerned about me since a soldier suicided on base last week.
Did you happen to know the soldier?
Yes. He wasn't a friend, but I met the Marine once or twice. He seemed normal at the time. I guess I'm afraid I might end up like him.
Do you have any plans to hurt yourself?
No. It certainly crossed my mind, especially lately. I just need it all to stop. Sometimes I can't handle it.
So I like to say with this stuff, it
Sorry.
gives novice clinicians a chance to screw up a bunch with a virtual patient before they get their hands on a live one. And this is work that my colleague Brett Talbot, who's been with us now 7 years, our chief medical director within the center, really driving it forward. Similar to the job interview stuff, you can pick multiple characters, you can put them in different settings, great authoring system to be able to build your best training cases, get feedback on your performance. You can do it with text, you can do it with voice. And he's here today, so if you want to pester him about this, we're certainly always looking for collaborations. But, basically the system, has 40 different patients of different age, gender, ethnic background, and we can inflate them to 3 different weight classes as relevant. I think this is one of those intuitive applications. When I think about my clinical training as a clinical psychologist, first year in grad school, read a few books on therapy, took a couple classes, maybe watched a couple videotapes of therapy sessions, and then I'm in there with patients. Maybe I should have carried a couple online patients. Every week have to sign in, meet the patient online, the virtual patient. And maybe good authors could do all the little twists that happen when you don't have textbook cases in therapy, when you work with someone for 6 months and then they unload something that totally changes the course of things. That's what you need training in, not the easy stuff. So I think virtual humans are the way to go with this. Now, SimCoach, I'm going to show this real quick. Again, I already talked about it a bit. A way to break down barriers to care with, an easy, accessible way to interact with folks, not a doc in a box. Let me just show a little bit of this.
Human, which means that I'm based on the real experiences and personalities of actual warfighters and their families. Anyway, I'm here to listen, and I'm here to help. Anything you want to talk about?
Talk to you? How do I do that?
Well, you're doing it right now. Just type in regular English. Anything troubling you?
If there is, why would I want to talk to you about it?
Well, here, I'll tell you what. I made a video that tells you a little bit more. I'm going to pop it up over here on the right. Not all the wounds of war are physical. When you don't dress a wound, it gets worse, doesn't it? SimCoach is here to talk about the issues weighing on your mind without worrying about anyone finding out about it. You start off by choosing the SimCoach that's right for you.
Oh, hi. Hope you weren't waiting long. Welcome to SimCoach. I'm Ellie.
Then just type in English. Ellie can listen, understand, and respond.
If you don't mind, I'd like to ask a few questions so I can figure out how to help you better. Is that okay? Everything you say here is completely anonymous, and we've taken a lot of steps to keep it that way. If you don't mind my asking, how's your sleeping been lately? Here's a link on the do's and don'ts of good sleep hygiene.
So back in 2010, voice recognition wasn't so good. We didn't want to lose people by having a character not respond properly, so we went with a text interface. That's all changed now as we move into the future. A whole variety of projects have spawned off of this architecture. One of the ones I'm really proud of is one that we originally built for the counseling center at USC, where they had a problem where students would be referred and there'd be a 3 to 5 week waiting period for a live clinician to be available. If they were in crisis, they'd get shipped out to the community, of course. But so they wanted us to build something to fill in that gap. So the idea was light cognitive behavioral, psychoeducation, health and wellness kind of things, and leverage a lot of the counseling center content that they've built. Good videos, good interactive training things, but nobody really accesses them much. And so we built this called AskArisa.
I'm Aristotle. I'm here to help you thrive by guiding you through some self-reflection and learn ways to live a happy, connected life. I also connect you to USC resources. This information came from evidence-based, peer-reviewed research. If you are not sure what to ask me, you can pick a question from the drop-down menu to the left. You can talk to me about sleep, stress, mood, healthy communication, or relationships. Feel free to interrupt me at any time during our session by clicking Next.
How can I prevent stress?
One of the most basic steps is to make sure you are taking
So,
care of your body.
The backstory on that was that we had a really attractive female character that we were using, but we had so much content, we weren't going to use voice actors to have a really nice, smooth voice to go with it. So it was jarring. We had this computer-generated voice. So we just happened to have, from Brett Talbot's virtual patient toolkit application, a virtual Hippocrates that would pop up and give you a little bit of advice and tips and so on. And we didn't tell anybody it was Hippocrates, so that's why the name AskArisa, Aristotle. And so that was less jarring. Now, eventually voice recognition, voice generation will get much better, and it'll be more natural and seamless, and we'll be able to maybe go from the statue to more flesh and blood. But now, this project now is morphed from being a fill in the gap between when you refer and when you get a clinician to something now we're testing as a wide open wellness application for the full university population. We could actually make money on it because you could, whether it's RE and it's got a USC Trojan logo or UCLA, what do you guys have, a bear or something? Or whatever, you could brand it. And well, anyway, all right, I'm giving away some secrets. Anyway, real quick, because I'm just at the end here. How do people relate to these things? When you tell people that they're interacting with a virtual human that is just software, the agent, versus that there's a person in the loop behind the scenes selecting responses, an avatar, what you find in this study anyway was that people had less fear of evaluation, worry about impression management, revealed more intensity of sadness, and generally self-disclosed more personal information when there wasn't a human in the loop. And we had these kinds of comments. Basically, you're getting all the pluses of talking to a person, but none of the shame, fear, worry about being evaluated. So there may be some value in producing these kinds of things. And we also found this effect with a small sample of veterans returning from Afghanistan, where when they come back, they have to do a thing called a post-deployment health assessment, a checklist. And typically they go through and say, no, I don't have any of these problems, no problem. And we found that very little symptom reporting, even when the PDHA was given anonymously, not on their military record. But when the character Ellie was asking these questions, you got more endorsement, even compared to the anonymous version. So revealing stigmatizing information, whether it should be stigmatizing or not, is of value. So just to finish off with the last slide that I didn't cover, there is some imagination ahead, and here's just a real quick project where now we're going from just having characters that respond to what we say. We give eyes and ears to a virtual character to read facial expression, gesture, vocal prosody, not what you say, but how you say it. We call it SimSensei. And here's an example of SimSensei in action. Doing an interview, you'll see on the left the interviewee.
Hi, I'm Ellie.
What we're tracking in terms of face from a webcam.
I was created to talk to people in a safe and secure environment. I'm not a therapist, but I'm here to learn about people and would love to learn about you.
So she builds
I'll ask
rapport
a few
for about
questions
7
to get
minutes,
us started.
casual small talk,
And
but then you
please
get
feel
into
free to
these
tell me
kind of
anything.
things.
When was the last time you felt really happy?
When was the last time? I don't know. Yeah, I'm not someone who's really like, I don't have any real highs. I feel like I'm a level person. It's just happy. I guess to answer your question, probably a couple months ago.
I noticed you were hesitant on that one. Would you say you are generally a happy person?
So the idea is that the character can sense behavior and update what it responds with. And that's a real-time interaction. This is something we're working on in an updated, fully new version of this, this piece of software. But we also found that when we had people that were quantified and screened as being in a state of distress, and about 800 people were studied in this project, we could find clear behavioral markers of, of course, happy, sad face, vertical eye gaze, looking down, smile intensity. Distressed people smile as much, but really low-level smiles, not full, robust smiles, touching the face with a hand, fidgeting, vocal parameters. These are all diagnostic measures that, differentiated, the tails of these groups. And I like to say it adds the third leg to the stool of human measurement. Only three things we can measure: self-report, what people tell you, what their physiology tells you, sorry about that, and what their behavior tells you. And so that's the direction of this. From those two studies and a recent editorial in JAMA that cited Ellie, this is being looked at as a direction that we can start to do more of, whether it's adding the sensing or taking mobile apps that people typically download, use for a week, and then it's like shelfware. Adding a virtual human to promote engagement that can engage with you, can talk to you about these things. We're doing an experiment, a rough prototype, taking a wellness manual that's packed with great information for the military, but nobody reads that stuff. So can we deliver it on a mobile phone, have the character pop up? Can we sense when their heart rate is going up or when they're hanging out in a bar till 2 in the morning and getting up at 6, 5 nights a week, and have the character pop up and say, hey, I don't want to talk about your drinking now, but let's talk about your sleep hygiene. Let me explain. Let's do a reaction time task here. And then next time you get 6 or 8 hours of sleep, I'll do this again and we can see the difference. So to engage users and use actionable information. So, a lot of hot topics in this area. I'm not going to talk about these. We all know about these. But the one I'm going to mention, virtual therapists and self-help. This will be the most contentious issue in the field of psychology in the next 10 years. We tend to give a pass with factory workers and, long-distance truck drivers now might be replaced. What about psychologists and psychiatrists? Then it starts to get to the bone. It'd be a big issue because we are getting better at this. But our view is fill in gaps with this stuff, not replace the things that we should do with a live person. So these are just some talking points on the different things that we covered. I'm at the end of my time, so I'm not going to go through each one of them. But a lot of use cases available in the future. And with that, if anybody wants a copy of this talk, I make all my talks freely available. Send me an email. I'll send you a link where you can download it with videos and everything. Thank you. Sorry, I went over a little bit over the 25 minutes.